Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. I heard the joke before the laughter. Oh, Ryan? He'd do anything for it. The room paused a heartbeat, like everyone had to decide whether it was safe to laugh. Then they did, louder than it deserved, sharper than it sounded in her mouth. I took a slow drink and kept my face neutral, eyes on the stem of my glass like I was inspecting the wine instead of my own marriage. I'm Ryan Carter, 40, a financial analyst in Denver. I was standing in a rental loft with Edison bulbs hanging too low, a grazing table drowning in olives and cured meats, and a cluster of her coworkers who suddenly thought they knew me. It wasn't my crowd, but I'd come because she asked. She'd said it would mean a lot if I showed up, smiled, shook hands, helped her look good in front of the people who measured value in quick takes and louder jokes. She wore the black dress I bought her last winter and an expression like the room belonged to her. When the line landed and the laughter followed, she didn't check my face to see how I took it. She basked like she'd just delivered a punchline that won her the night. I kept my hand steady. The glass made a soft click when I set it down, that precise sound you hear when crystal meets stone. A project manager with an expensive watch glanced at me, waiting for reaction like a spectator after a foul. I met his eyes and gave him nothing. People don't know what to do with a man who refuses to perform on cue. Relax, he knows I'm kidding. Another laugh, thinner this time. Someone changed the subject to the herb garden on the balcony. My chest felt hollow and clean, the way a room feels after you move the furniture out. I watched her throw back her hair and collect small laughs from people who thought cruelty, framed as humor, was a personality trait. The spread was good. Whoever catered knew their business. I built a plate like I had no concerns bigger than chorizo and manchego. A woman from marketing asked about the mountains, the best drives, where to go when winter hits. I gave her a route, a coffee shop, a hike above timberline that steals your breath in the right month. I said it calmly, as if my life hadn't just been condensed into a line about desperation. It wasn't the first time. Words don't slide out of nowhere that clean. Weeks of smaller digs had laid the runway. The eye roll at a gift I put thought into, the smirk when I suggested a weekend plan, the story at brunch that painted me as overeager because I double-checked the reservation. Nothing nuclear, just slow erosion. A few months back, she'd started talking like I was a dependable subscription she could cancel any time without penalty. Don't make such a big deal out of everything. That was one of her favorites lately. She used it like bubble wrap to cushion whatever came next. She'd call my attention romantic if friends were around and needy when they weren't. She'd float a joke about me chasing her in front of a cousin, smile at the cousin's laugh, then pat my arm as if her touch could vacuum seal the disrespect before I noticed. I noticed. A stable man doesn't explode. He observes. He also doesn't ignore his own record. I could list the payments by date and institution, the vacations booked when she needed a reset, the overtime absorbed, so our life stayed easy. Numbers have a way of quieting noise. The balance sheet isn't a love letter, but it is a truth serum. Even in that room, with the hanging lights and careful small talk, I felt the ledger settle. I walked the balcony once for air. The city threw back reflections from 1,000 windows. Down on the street, a rideshare idled with its hazards pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Inside, her laugh rose again and drifted toward me. I leaned on the rail and let the night cool my wrists. People say humiliation burns. To me it felt like frost, like the air right before snow where everything gets clear enough to cut. Back inside, I let conversations find me. Her boss talked cycling routes and altitude sickness. An intern asked whether budgeting apps actually help people who don't make much. I answered directly. I was being the exact man I am, steady voice, precise language, feet set. If anyone looked over to see whether the joke had rattled me, they saw a man unconcerned with approval. She came by once with a plate and a smile stretched a little too tight. You trying the figs? I nodded. Her perfume landed and then passed. She waited for me to throw her a lifeline, to reassure her with a soft joke, to save her from the echo of her own punchline. I took a fig, thanked her, and let the space breathe. Sometimes silence isn't withholding. It's measurement. The party thinned. People began saying goodbyes in clusters. Compliments were offered to no one in particular about the view and the playlist. Her friend hugged her, whispered something near her ear, and glanced at me with caution. I put on my jacket. She reached for my arm and touched the sleeve like she was checking fabric. Ready? I nodded. We said thanks to our host and rode the elevator down in a vertical hush. In the car, she scrolled her phone, thumb moving like a metronome, keeping time against an empty beat. I drove the surface streets. At a long light, a couple crossed in front of us, holding hands the way you do when you don't have anything to prove. The light changed and I didn't move. A horn behind us tapped. I eased forward and watched the couple disappear into the night. Home has its own temperature. You can tell if a house is good by the way it holds quiet. I hung my jacket, put the keys in the dish, and turned on the kitchen light. She poured a glass of water and leaned on the island like a judge about to offer a lenient sentence. I cleaned my glass, set it upside down to dry, and checked the calendar on the fridge. The next few weeks were stacked with her plans, my deadlines, and a dinner with my sister I'd been postponing. I circled the dinner in my head. It didn't keep me up. Sleep found me fast and full, like a decision had moved in and taken the empty room. Morning came with clean light through the blinds. I made coffee and watched the first steam rise. She walked in wrapped in a robe, hair still set in last night's wave. She waited for me to start the daily conversation that clears the air after a party. How was it? Who said what? What did you think? I tasted the coffee and let it sit on my tongue long enough to feel the heat. The mug clicked softly when I set it down. Some answers reveal themselves without being asked. People imagine a boiling point. I don't. For me, it's a line, thin and permanent. You can't see until you step past it. Last night drew it crisp. I felt it settle the way a level bubble centers in glass. If you've ever rebuilt something real, you know the moment you stop sanding and start measuring. That's where I was, coffee in hand, in my kitchen, the city waking outside, the joke still hanging in the air like cheap cologne. Something was off. It wasn't me. And now that I could see it that clearly, I knew exactly what to do with the clarity. The morning after the party moved quietly, like the city had decided to keep its voice down around me. She floated through the kitchen, making light conversation about a podcast, the new gel manicure, a coworker's promotion. I let her words pass the way a lake lets wind skate across it. Surface ripples, no depth. When she finally glanced over my mug and asked if I'd slept, I nodded once and said I had. It wasn't a lie. By lunch, I'd sorted the practical layer no one sees. I moved my direct deposit to a separate checking account I'd opened months earlier and never used. I pulled copies of our tax returns, photographed the home inventory, and exported a password manager file into a printed list that fit inside a plain manila envelope. I set a credit freeze with all 3 bureaus. None of it was hostile. It was housekeeping, the kind a man does when he stops pretending storms never arrive. That evening, she came home bright with social energy. A friend had texted her screenshots from the party, the skyline, the charcuterie, somebody's badly framed boomerang of clinking glasses. Between images, I caught a fragment of the caption she'd posted. He's a good sport. The words worked hard to sound sweet. They read like a shrug. I cleaned the pan and told her dinner was ready. She thanked me without looking up and asked if we should go to Nora's rooftop thing on Friday. I told her yes. Some rooms you choose on purpose. Wednesday, I heard it again. She was on speaker with her friend in the bedroom, voice floating down the hall. They were recapping the party, debriefing laughs like trophies. He'll do anything, she said, casual as a weather report. The friend hummed approval. I stood in the doorway and watched the shadow of her moving against the wall. When she noticed me, she ended the call quickly and smiled like a child caught with a cookie. I didn't ask who it was. I asked one question, level and simple. Is that really how you see me? She cocked her head, the practice smirk arriving right on time. Relax. It's a joke. I said, I heard you. That was the whole conversation. Sometimes 5 words are enough to mark a grave. I spent the next morning at my desk, not thinking about feelings, but about systems. I reviewed the mortgage autopay, the car note, the utilities. I removed her authorized user card from one account and left the rest alone. I updated 2-factor on everything I personally owned. I pulled my passport and birth certificate from the safe and set them in the briefcase I only use for quarterly reviews. I added one soft thing, a clean shirt, rolled tight. Because planning is how you respect your future. The small public tests multiplied like gnats. At a Thursday happy hour, she told a table that I freak out if we don't color code groceries. It landed better than it deserved. I smiled with my eyes and asked the bartender about their rye selection. A colleague of hers looked at me longer than was polite, like she was checking for bruises and finding a mirror instead. Later, in the rideshare, my wife nudged my shoulder and said I was being touchy. I said I was being patient. She took that as a win. I took it as inventory. Friday afternoon, I booked a consultation with a lawyer for the following week. I wrote clarity on next steps and attached nothing. I also texted my sister and kept it simple. Dinner still on. No emotional unloading. I was building a spine other people could see. At home, she tested the perimeter in different ways. A new dress appeared. A candle I liked burned in the bedroom. She leaned over me while I typed and asked if I wanted to take a break. Voice pitched to sound playful. I said I had an early morning and turned back to a spreadsheet. In the reflection of the window, I watched the surprise cross her face and settle into calculation. Saturday, we met friends for brunch. She arrived a few minutes late to our own table, though we'd ridden together, a small stunt designed to create a solo entrance. She told a polished version of a story where I double-booked us. The punchline was neediness. The table laughed. It wasn't malicious, just lazy. I let it burn out on its own oxygen. When someone asked about market volatility, I answered with a short metaphor about earthquakes and building codes. Heads nodded. The conversation moved to travel. She reached under the table and squeezed my knee, a gesture designed to telegraph harmony. I let my legs stay steady and returned to my coffee. There's a difference between peace and optics. Only one is worth keeping. That afternoon, I cleaned the garage. I labeled the boxes I'd never bothered labeling. I put my documents in a fireproof pouch and slid it behind an old toolbox she never opens. I changed my emergency contacts at work and removed her name. I updated my medical directive to the same effect. No speeches. Paper carries authority precisely because it doesn't raise its voice. That night, the apology arrived dressed as teasing. "Don't be so serious," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "People joke. You have to let things roll off you." I told her I'm built to let truth settle, not roll. She blinked, confused by the geometry. Then she tried another angle. "You know I love you." I said I know what love sounds like. The sentence ended there. She left the room, and I finished folding laundry, a small discipline that keeps a man from mistaking motion for progress. By Sunday, the universe started sending confirmations in polite envelopes. One of her co-workers sent me a neutral text. "You good?" Nothing accusatory, just a temperature check from someone who had watched the edges of a joke cut. I responded with a thumbs up and a line about busy season. He didn't push. People who recognize dignity don't tug at it. I met my sister that evening. We ate simple food and talked about our parents' old house and whether the roof finally needed replacing. She waited until dessert to ask about me, not my marriage. I told her I was training again, that I'd added a mile to my morning loop, and it felt like reclaiming square footage inside my own chest. She reached across the table and squeezed my forearm. She didn't ask for details. I paid the bill and walked her to her car. Monday at work, I blocked 90 minutes and wrote 3 emails. The first to the lawyer, confirming date and time. The second to HR, listing the forms I'd need if personal status changed. The third to myself, a private ledger of facts, dates, locations, lines spoken. Not a diary, a timeline. If anyone ever asked why I acted, I'd be able to answer without heat. The document ended with one sentence. Respect isn't a feeling, it's a policy. The invitation to another gathering landed midweek. A colleague's promotion party, same circle, same rooftop view, same audience that knew how to laugh on command. She floated the idea at dinner, watching me carefully. I held her gaze, took a measured breath, and said yes again. Her shoulders loosened like she'd won back something fragile. What she didn't see was the line through my decision. Before bed, I stood in the doorway and watched the house at rest. The small hums, the predictable clicks, the faithful systems doing their jobs. I thought about structures, about loads and spans, and what fails first when you cut corners. People imagine marriages collapse in a single dramatic event. Sometimes they do. More often, they fail inspection months before the roof caves. That week had been an inspection, joists measured, nails counted, rods circled and read. By Friday morning, I'd ironed the shirt I'd packed and set it in the briefcase. Not a threat. I looked in the mirror and saw a man who'd stopped negotiating with the part of himself that wants to be liked by rooms that don't matter. The pressure had done its work. It hadn't bent me. It had formed an edge. All that was left now was a room, a view, and a sentence said once, clearly, with witnesses. The promotion party looked like a replica of the last one. Same skyline, same Edison bulbs, same crowd tuned to laugh on cue. We stepped out of the elevator into music and the smell of rosemary cocktails. I felt steady, like I'd already done the hard work in silence, and this was just a delivery. The shirt I'd ironed lay clean under my jacket. In my briefcase, passport, copies, the single-rolled shirt. Proof that planning isn't drama, it's respect for your next move. She warmed to the room fast, collecting orbit. Familiar faces, familiar small talk. I spoke when spoken to and let the view do the heavy lifting. The city had that clear night sharpness that makes edges honest. A colleague of hers told me he'd started investing. I gave him one sentence about liquidity and sleep. He nodded like I'd said something wise. Half an hour in, a ring of people formed by the railing. She was at the center, black dress catching the string lights. The conversation turned to relationships, low-hanging fruit for people who don't want to talk about themselves. Someone said, "You two seem solid." She smiled, head tilt, eyes scanning the audience the way performers scan a stage. Then she reached for the line she'd been workshopping, the one that had bought her a laugh before. Please. Ryan would do anything for it. There it was, casual, public, designed to ride the wave and break on my face. The circle laughed out of habit. It sounded like an appliance kicking on. I let it run. Then I stepped into the pocket of silence that follows every cheap laugh. I didn't look angry. I looked exactly like a man who had decided what happens next. "You're right," I said. "I did do anything. Mortgage, insurance, car notes, the trips you needed when work got overwhelming, the dinners you posted, the quiet work no one claps for because it shows up on time." No one moved. Somewhere behind us a glass touched stone and made that small bell sound. I let the list breathe. But there's one thing I won't do. I won't stay married to someone who confuses loyalty with weakness. Her smile collapsed without falling. The group shifted like a single animal. No one reached for a joke to save the moment. A couple looked down as if the floor had interesting news. One of her coworkers, same watch as last week, went still in that way men do when they recognize the edge of a line. I took my keys from my pocket and slid the house key off the ring. That soft scrape of metal on metal felt louder than the music. I set the key and the garage opener on the cocktail table next to the small succulents the host had arranged to look spontaneous. I kept my eyes on her face and kept my tone even. "Since you think I'm that desperate, consider this your freedom. Joke's over." There was nothing else to add. I wasn't interested in making a case. Cases plead. Decisions end. I turned, buttoned my jacket, took the briefcase by its handle, and walked. The kind of pace you use when you're leaving a building that's already been condemned. People parted without meaning to. Someone breathed, "Whoa," like we were in a movie. The host looked relieved and stricken at the same time. The elevator doors opened on their own timing, the way good doors do when you've earned your exit. The city followed me down in reflections. In the lobby, the quiet hit, like a fresh sheet being pulled tight. I stepped into the night, called a ride, and felt that steady internal click you get when a measurement lands dead center. The driver asked for the destination. I gave him the address I'd booked an hour earlier, a short-term rental near the park with a door code and an empty closet. I texted no one. The phone stayed face down on my thigh the whole drive. Upstairs, the place smelled like lemon cleaner and new paint. I set the briefcase on the table, took off my jacket, and rolled the cuffs of my shirt like I was about to fix a sink. Small tasks first. Turned off shared locations, signed out of the smart home app, removed my card from 2 accounts she uses for convenience. I opened the window a crack and let the night in. City noise, yes, but honest. The phone lit up on the table. Her name. Then again. Then a text bubble, then a longer one. I didn't touch it. I'd said what mattered in the only room that required hearing it. Everything else would try to drag me back into the theater where jokes act like smoke machines. I don't breathe that. I showered, the kind of quick, practical rinse that resets the day. I shaved, because small proofs steady a man. In the mirror, I looked like myself, just not the version willing to exchange silence for comfort. I hung the single-rolled shirt in the empty closet. It looked like a declaration. Maybe it was. Messages stacked as the hour turned. A friend of hers, then the coworker with the watch, then an unknown number that started with, "We should talk." I put the phone on Do Not Disturb and placed it face up anyway. I wasn't hiding from anything. I poured a glass of water, sat on the edge of the clean bed, and listened to the building's hum. Even machines have a kind of integrity when they're maintained. I thought about my father teaching me the difference between quitting and leaving. Quitting is an argument you're still trying to win. Leaving is a decision you honor without witnesses. I'd given witness enough for one night. The rest would be paperwork, calendars, and a voice that never rises. Before sleep, I emailed the attorney a single line. Proceed per our consultation. No attachments or flourish. I set a reminder to stop the last remaining autopays tied to our joint comfort. I closed the lid on the briefcase and clicked off the lamp. Out the window, the city kept cycling through its lights. Somewhere, above the park, a plane dragged itself toward some other place. I lay back and let the room settle around me. People think revenge is noise. Mine was clean air. A clear sentence in a crowded room. A key set down where everyone could see it. Sleep came like it had been waiting for permission. When I woke before dawn, the phone sat where I'd left it, heavy with the weight of everything I wouldn't say. I laced my shoes, ran the loop by the lake until my breath made that crisp winter ribbon in the air, and came back to a life that had already begun without asking anyone for approval. Respect isn't negotiated. It's enforced. Last night wasn't a scene. It was a policy going into effect. Morning makes everything louder when a line has been crossed. The phone lit up while I laced my shoes. Missed calls stacked, texts climbing the screen like ivy, trying to find a surface to cling to. The messages pivoted in predictable arcs: confusion, embarrassment, bargaining, blame. First came the soft openers. We need to talk. You can't just leave like that. Then the edits. It was a joke. Everyone knew. Then the accusation. You humiliated me. I let the screen go dark. Silence isn't punishment. It's policy. Work was a relief in the way tasks are when they have edges. Numbers, deadlines, documents with headers. I answered emails, signed a vendor contract, sent an update to a client who only cares about whether a thing works. Mid-morning, 2 texts arrived from unknown numbers that introduced themselves as her friends. One checked if I was okay. The other claimed I'd overreacted. I replied to neither. Adults don't litigate their marriages by group chat. By lunch, the ripple reached my sister. She asked if I wanted to meet for tacos or space. I chose space and thanked her for asking the right way. I ate at my desk and watched the city browse itself outside the window. The party replayed in short clips that didn't sting. The memory carried no heat, only the clarity of something done correctly the first time. The next wave arrived in the afternoon. A coworker from her office emailed me a single sentence: "You didn't deserve that," and signed his name. He'd stood in that ring and looked away when the laugh landed. Men know when they've witnessed something they should not have allowed. I sent back a polite acknowledgement and returned to the spreadsheet. At 4, reception pinged me. Visitor in the lobby, no appointment, asking for me by name. I didn't need the camera feed to know who it was. I told them to inform her I wasn't available and to call building security if she refused to leave. 10 minutes later, the guard called. Situation resolved. The cadence in his voice said professional. I appreciate competence in any field. After work, I drove to the rental and made dinner the way I always do when I need to feel the floor under me. Knife steady, pan hot, salt when it matters. I ate at the small table by the window and watched a couple argue in the parking lot. Not loudly, just insistently, like they were trying to shape air into a different answer. I washed the plate and set it to dry. The phone blinked again. A photo of us from a good year. A line about not throwing away history. History isn't thrown away. It gets archived when it stops telling the truth. I spent Saturday on the small mechanics of separation. A storage unit in my name. A P.O. box. The last autopay rerouted to the new account. I booked a meeting with the realtor to determine equity and timeline. While I measured the closet for boxes, the phone buzzed with a new phase. She wanted to meet in a public place, said she deserved a chance to explain. Deserve is a word that loses weight when it rides on the back of mockery. I let the message sit with the rest. By afternoon, the social part of the consequences bloomed. A mutual friend sent me a screenshot of her post. A generic square with a quote about grace and growth, comment section divided into hearts and careful compliments. 20 minutes later it vanished. Digital repentance is usually tested against engagement before it becomes conviction. I took a walk and counted the steps to the corner, because discipline keeps a man from drifting when storms try to pull. Monday, she tried a different door. A gift bag appeared at my office reception. The black dress folded into tissue, A candle, the house key I'd left on the table, now threaded onto a ribbon like it had been rehabilitated by craft. A note pierced the paper with a sentence about starting over. I instructed reception to mark the package refused and return to sender. Starting over requires wood that hasn't been warped by the weather you choose. In the middle of the week, the retaliation phase arrived with the desperation that always follows failed seduction. A long message accused me of emotional cruelty, of abandoning her, of collaborating with strangers to embarrass her. She referenced the publicness like it was my invention. I thought about the elevator, the ring of faces, the way the room held the word anything like a toy. I set the phone face down. If you honor your own boundaries, nothing a storm says about you sticks. Consequences aren't only social. They're logistical. She tried to log into an account I no longer connected to our life. The credit freeze I'd placed did exactly what it was designed to do. Stopped a forgotten password from becoming a new card. A fraud alert pinged my email with a timestamp that matched her last angry text by 3 minutes. I brewed coffee and forwarded the alert to the folder labeled process. The feeling was relief that systems work when you build them before you need them. By Friday, the universe had done some of my work without being asked. Her boss pulled her from a client training she'd been angling for, citing optics. People avoid risk that smells like drama. 2 of her closest coworkers unfollowed her private account. A third reached out to me again, not for gossip, just to say he respected the way I handled it. Reputation isn't a scoreboard, it's a weather report. Everyone dresses accordingly. She tried one last approach. Nostalgia scaled up to pleading. A long midnight text listed every good memory in bright detail, as if inventory could rebuild structure. The beach. The promotion we celebrated with takeout on the floor. My father's funeral, where she held my elbow during the eulogy and didn't let go. I read it once and let the weight of it sit where it belonged, in the past. Respect is the only glue that keeps memory from becoming a weapon. Once respect is gone, memory turns sharp. On Saturday, my sister dropped by with a toolbox and a plant. We set the plant in the light and tightened a loose cabinet hinge in the small kitchen. We didn't discuss what had happened because nothing was wrong with my decision. We talked about a 10K in October, about her kid's science project. Late that night, a final message came through. Short, plain, no exclamation points. She wrote that she understood now why the joke landed like it did, that she hadn't meant it, that she wanted to fix it. Understanding is not repair. There's no counterweight for public contempt except the boundary that removes you from its reach. I turned the phone over and clicked off the lamp. This is what breakdown looks like when you refuse to be drafted into someone else's chaos. Panic, then seduction, then blame, then public weather changing without your input. I answered to the only jurisdiction that matters, the standard I hold for myself. She had her laugh. I had my line. Everything after that was gravity doing what it always does once you stop pretending it won't. Finality didn't arrive as a bang. It showed up as appointments that started on time and ended with signatures. The attorney laid out options, timelines, best and worst cases. I listened, asked plain questions, and made decisions the way I do at work: scope, cost, outcome. We filed. Service went out. She replied with the kind of shock people reserve for consequences they thought were theoretical. There were a few attempts to slow things down with feelings. I stayed with facts. Whenever a message tried to drag me into argument, I read it once and returned to the checklist. We met once in a neutral conference room for mediation. She wore the black dress, like fabric might reopen a door she had already bricked over with jokes. I brought a folder, a pen, and a quiet posture. The mediator spoke in soft rhythms about common ground. There wasn't much to find. She wanted the house. I wanted neither the house nor the fight over it. I asked for a listing date, a fair split, and a clean exit from each other's accounts. She asked for time. I nodded at the calendar and said we would honor it provided the dates were real, not sentimental. The conversation circled and jerked forward the way these things do when one person still wants the old script. At one point she said, "We can fix this if you stop being so absolute." I watched the mediator's eyes flick toward me for a response. My voice stayed level. Respect is absolute. Nothing more. We moved on to the vehicles, the contents of the house, the joint car that never should have existed as long as it did. At the end, the mediator thanked us for being civil. I don't aim for civil. I aim for clear. Friends sorted themselves without me pushing. The ones who lived on gossip floated away on their own. The ones who liked me for my steadiness stayed exactly where they were, quietly in place. My sister and I ran that 10K in October. The air cut clean, and my feet felt like they belonged to someone who had carried his own weight and set the rest down. After the finish line, she handed me a bottle of water and said, "You look like yourself again." I did. That's the whole point. When the house listed, I walked through once with the realtor. The rooms sounded different, empty. I took what I owned and nothing else. The rest went into two piles, hers and donation. I left a short note taped inside a kitchen drawer with the alarm codes I'd already turned over and the date the utilities would change. No message beneath the message. Just logistics, the same way I found them. She tried for one last summit meeting before we signed. A late-night text asked for coffee at the place where we used to split a muffin and read the paper. I didn't answer. The next morning, I went for a run, showered, and drove to the attorney's office. Papers feel heavier than they are when you understand their meaning. I initialed what needed my initials and signed my name where my name belonged. The attorney slid a copy across the table. "You handled this well," she said. I nodded and put the folder in my briefcase. Handling it well was never for applause. It was for sleep. Afterward, I went back to the rental and did what I always do when a chapter ends. Laundry, a grocery run, a call to my barber. I changed the oil in my car with my own hands because the motion steadies me. That evening, the sky over the park turned the particular blue it only gets for 15 minutes in late summer. I sat on the steps and watched people walk their dogs. Ordinary is a privilege when you've earned it. I made a list, not of traits I wanted, but of non-negotiables I would honor. The first line read, "No public contempt." The second, "No jokes that cost dignity." The third was shorter than a word. "Listen, men are told to move on." I moved forward, which is different. Moving on tries to outrun the past. Moving forward keeps your eyes open and your spine straight. The last loose ends tied themselves with less drama than I prepared for. The house sold. Funds hit the escrow, then our separate accounts. She moved into a place her friend found, closer to the office, smaller than she wanted. I heard that from a coworker who no longer called himself her friend. Every so often, someone asks whether I regret the way I ended it, publicly, with witnesses. I tell them the truth. I ended it privately. The public part was a single sentence that named reality where it was created. Everything else happened in quiet rooms with forms and clocks. If you think exposure is revenge, you haven't understood the architecture. Exposure is just light. What the light finds is on you. Months later, I ran into her by accident outside a downtown gallery. We saw each other at the same time. She looked like someone who had learned about gravity the hard way. She said my name like it was a door creaking open. I said hers like a polite nod to a neighbor. She opened her mouth, then closed it. There are apologies that live in the throat and never make it to air because the listener doesn't need them. We stood in that clean, awkward moment, two people who had once shared a life and now shared a sidewalk. I wished her a good evening and stepped past. I moved out of the rental and into a smaller place with morning light and a quiet hallway. I hung nothing on the walls for a week, the way you sit in a new house and listen first. Then I hung 3 things: a map of the Front Range, a photo of my father and me kneeling by a tackle box, and a simple framed print above the desk that reads policy. It isn't art. It's a reminder. Feelings change. Policy does not. On my first night there, I cooked a steak in a pan of green beans and ate with the window open. Music low. A book face down waiting for me to return. My phone buzzed once with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go. The new neighbor across the hall knocked to borrow a corkscrew. I handed it over and said goodnight without the need to impress or perform. Later, I texted my sister a photo of the view. She sent back a thumbs up and a heart. No questions. The best people don't require a speech to understand your peace. I won't pretend I never think about the old house or the years that were good. They were real. They're also finished. What I carry isn't anger or a story about villains. I carry the policy I should have written sooner. I will not share my life with someone who mocks the hand that steadies the table. That's not a rule for other people. It's a rule for me. There's a quiet irony to how it all ended. She said I'd do anything for it, meaning attention, intimacy, proximity to a woman who thought laughter was leverage. The truth is simpler. I did the one thing a man who respects himself must always be willing to do. I walked away and didn't look back. I refuse to lose myself again.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.